At 5:12 in the morning on April 18th, 1906, the entire city of San Francisco lay fast asleep. Then, in less than 1 minute, that city nearly ceased to exist. The 1906 San Francisco earthquake is recorded as one of the deadliest natural disasters in American history. More than 3,000 people perished, 225,000 lost their homes, and the damage equals $10 billion in today's value. But what is more terrifying than those numbers is not the scale, it is the speed. In just 45 to 60 seconds, nearly the entire city center was erased from existence. San Francisco Bay sits on the western edge of the United States, where two enormous tectonic plates have been silently grinding against each other for millions of years. That is the San Andreas Fault, a massive fracture 1,300 kilometers long, running the entire length of the California coastline. The Pacific Plate moves northward while the North American Plate holds firm, and at that intersection, pressure builds relentlessly over decades. In 1906, San Francisco was the largest city on the American West Coast, home to approximately 415,000 residents. This city was the financial, cultural, and commercial hub of the entire West Coast, wealthy from the gold rush and Pacific trade. San Francisco's streets stretched across steep rolling hills, paved with wood and cobblestone, where horse-drawn carriages and cable cars ran side by side. Much of San Francisco was built on fill land, meaning ground artificially deposited over shallow bay areas. This type of ground is extremely dangerous during earthquakes because it behaves like liquid in a process called liquefaction. Scientists later discovered that San Francisco had experienced numerous small earthquakes in the preceding years, a series of warnings that nobody understood at the time. And on the eve of the disaster, many San Francisco residents noticed strange signs, restless animals, shifting well water levels, but nobody understood what it meant. At 5:12 in the morning on April 18th, the pressure that had built for decades along the San Andreas Fault finally reached its breaking point. In an instant, a fault segment 480 kilometers long began slipping at a terrifying speed. The Pacific Plate lurched northward up to 6 meters relative to the North American Plate, all within less than 1 minute. The magnitude of this earthquake has been recalculated by modern scientists as 7.9, strong enough to be felt 600 kilometers away. To put that in perspective, the energy released in that earthquake was equivalent to approximately 15 atomic bombs of the type dropped on Hiroshima. In the very first seconds, seismic waves traveled through the earth at several kilometers per second, causing the ground to undulate like ocean waves. Wooden buildings bent and creaked, but many survived because timber has a degree of natural flexibility. But brick buildings had no such luck because brick cannot bend, and they collapsed en masse within seconds. The south of Market District, built on soft fill land, suffered the worst damage as the ground beneath liquefied and dragged buildings downward. San Francisco City Hall, one of the most magnificent structures on the West Coast, was completely destroyed in less than 1 minute. Only the steel skeleton remained standing alone, amid the rubble like a giant rib cage. But the worst had not yet begun, because moments after the shaking stopped, fires erupted across the city. The earthquake had ruptured hundreds of underground gas lines throughout the city, and when escaping gas met morning cooking flames, everything ignited instantly. When firefighters turned on the hydrants to fight the flames, they discovered that nearly all the water mains had also been completely ruptured by the earthquake. This was a disaster within a disaster, as fire now spread freely with nothing to stop it. Wind from San Francisco Bay, blowing inland, pushed the flames faster and stronger through each neighborhood. This fire would continue burning for 3 continuous days and nights, destroying approximately 400 hectares of urban area. To stop the fire from spreading eastward, the military decided to use explosives to conduct controlled demolitions of buildings ahead of the fire line. This decision backfired repeatedly, as the explosives accidentally ignited additional fires instead of creating the intended firebreaks. Amid that chaos, hundreds of thousands of people poured into the streets, carrying whatever they could, fleeing from the fire. Many dragged pushcarts and mattresses, bundling belongings in blankets, endless columns of people moving toward the ferry docks and open parks. Golden Gate Park and the Presidio beaches became enormous tent cities housing tens of thousands of people. Many large brick buildings survived the shaking, only to be completely consumed by fire, because brick walls provided no insulation against the heat. Temperatures inside those massive fires reached levels capable of melting glass and bending iron rails. Throughout those 3 days, fire crews worked without rest, but without water, forced to pump from San Francisco Bay using mobile pumps. Ultimately, what stopped the fire was not human effort, but the deliberately wide boulevard of Van Ness Avenue in the city's urban plan. Combined with a shift in wind direction, the fire finally died on April 21, 1906. When the smoke cleared and people could see the full picture clearly for the first time, what they saw looked no different from a city after war. 25,000 buildings were destroyed, representing approximately 2/3 of the entire city of San Francisco. Of the more than 3,000 officially recorded deaths, the majority were actually victims of the fire, not the earthquake itself. Historians later discovered that the actual death toll may have been far higher, as authorities deliberately underreported figures to prevent panic and protect the real estate industry. Some independent estimates suggest the death toll may have reached 6,000, especially in Chinese and working-class communities that were less thoroughly documented. Economic losses equivalent to $7 to $9 billion at that time, or more than $10 billion in today's value, nearly completely wiped out the entire West Coast economy. But the terrain of the region changed permanently, with the San Andreas Fault shifting ground horizontally up to 6 meters at certain points. This was the first time in history that scientists could precisely measure and document horizontal ground displacement following an earthquake. It was through studying the aftermath of the San Francisco earthquake that scientist Harry Fielding Reid formulated the elastic rebound theory, the foundation of all modern earthquake science. Beyond science, the disaster also exposed the deadly weaknesses of urban infrastructure, particularly the water supply and underground pipeline systems. The entire city water system had been built without any consideration for earthquake resistance, a mistake that many cities worldwide continue to make today. Equally remarkable was the speed of response from authorities and citizens, as large-scale rescue efforts began within just hours of the disaster. The U.S. Army from the Presidio base deployed immediately to maintain order and distribute food to hundreds of thousands of displaced people. The American Red Cross received millions of donated dollars from around the world in the first days after the disaster, representing one of the largest international relief campaigns of that era. In the first few weeks, more than 225,000 people lived in outdoor refugee camps without permanent shelter, clean water, or adequate sanitation. April temperatures in San Francisco are cool, and nights spent sleeping outdoors without shelter caused additional hardship for the survivors. Even buildings that survived the disaster were unsafe to occupy, as the earthquake had cracked foundations and weakened structures in ways not visible to the naked eye. The city decided to rebuild, and did so at a remarkable speed, with most of San Francisco reconstructed within just 3 years. The reconstruction was so rapid that people rebuilt much of what had been destroyed without significantly changing the urban plan or improving construction quality. This was a significant problem that would haunt San Francisco for decades, as the same vulnerable areas continued to exist with the same structural weaknesses. The 1906 earthquake profoundly altered the demographics of the entire Bay region, as hundreds of thousands of people never returned to San Francisco. The city of Oakland and the East Bay suburbs surged dramatically as San Francisco residents relocated seeking safer ground. The psychological impact on survivors was immeasurable, with many describing the feeling that the ground beneath their feet could no longer be trusted. Environmentally, the disaster severely contaminated the groundwater systems and San Francisco Bay shoreline for years afterward. Millions of tons of brick rubble from the reconstruction were dumped into San Francisco Bay, further expanding the already dangerous fill land areas. The 1906 San Francisco disaster triggered a genuine revolution in global seismology science. Before 1906, very few people understood the actual mechanism of earthquakes, and no standardized measurement system existed. Data collected after the San Francisco earthquake became the foundation on which scientists built the world's first global seismic hazard maps. The California State Earthquake Investigation Commission, established after the disaster, published the first comprehensive scientific report on a major earthquake in history. In terms of construction, the disaster pushed California to enact the first earthquake-resistant building codes in America, though serious enforcement took several more decades. The earthquake also represented the first time the United States mobilized a large-scale federal disaster relief campaign, laying the groundwork for the modern disaster management system that followed. In 1989, 83 years after the disaster, another earthquake measuring 7.1 struck right in the San Francisco Bay Area. The 1989 Loma Prieta earthquake proved that the lessons of 1906 had not been fully learned, as many areas built on old fill land, again, suffered the worst damage. Today, the United States Geological Survey, known as the USGS, operates a network of more than 1,400 seismic monitoring stations in California alone. The modern Shake Alert early warning system can detect tremors and send warnings seconds to tens of seconds before destructive waves reach populated areas. This system was developed directly from the lessons of the 1906 San Francisco earthquake and the major earthquakes that followed. San Francisco today has significantly improved its earthquake-resistant building standards, but the city still faces an unchangeable reality. The San Andreas Fault continues accumulating pressure today, and scientists estimate a 62% probability that an earthquake of 6.7 magnitude or greater will strike within the next 30 years. That means, for the more than 7 million people living in the San Francisco Bay Area today, the question is not whether it will happen, but when it will happen. But the story of 1906 is not only a story about the destructive power of nature, it is also a story about how people respond when everything collapses. Within 15 years of the disaster, San Francisco hosted the 1915 Panama Pacific World's Fair, a declaration to the world that the city had been reborn. This is what San Francisco has proven repeatedly throughout its history, that a city is not defined solely by its buildings. The San Francisco disaster also teaches us an important lesson about truth and information in crisis, that when authorities conceal data, the long-term damage is even more severe. When authorities concealed the true death toll to protect real estate values, they also delayed society's recognition of the area's true level of danger. That meant decades later, when the city rebuilt on the same dangerous land, residents lacked the complete information needed to understand the risks they were living with. Following the disaster, California gradually developed the Alquist-Priolo Act of 1972, establishing strict regulations on construction near active geological fault lines. This law stipulates that no habitable structure may be built within 50 feet, approximately 15 meters, of an active seismic fault line. Advances in seismic engineering following 1906 have saved thousands of lives in subsequent earthquakes in California and around the world. Today, buildings are designed with base isolation systems that allow the structure to move independently of the ground, significantly reducing the forces acting on the frame. The San Francisco Bay Bridge, rebuilt after the 1989 Loma Prieta earthquake, now has one of the most advanced seismic resistance systems in the world. But engineering is only one part of the picture, because equally important is the preparation of individuals and communities for the worst-case scenario. California today has the drop, cover, and hold-on program taught in schools, and conducts a statewide drill called the Great Shakeout every year. More than 20 million people worldwide participate in the Great Shakeout every year, a number with roots directly traceable to the lessons of 1906. Looking back at the 1906 San Francisco disaster, from today's perspective, what stands out most is not the scale of the destruction, but what it changed. It transformed seismology. It transformed structural engineering. It transformed how governments respond to disasters. And it transformed humanity's understanding of the planet we inhabit. And perhaps most importantly, it changed the question that scientists and engineers ask, from will an earthquake happen to how do we learn to live alongside it. The San Andreas Fault is not the only threat, as California has more than 500 documented active geological fault lines. This raises a larger question. When we build great cities on seismically active land, what exactly are we wagering on? We are wagering on science, on engineering, on community preparedness, and on the hope that this time we are sufficiently prepared. 1906 teaches us that preparedness can never be sufficient if we stop improving it, because nature never stops accumulating energy. The San Andreas Fault is accumulating 15 to 20 millimeters of pressure every year along its length near the San Francisco Bay segment. Those millimeters do not sound like much, but when pressure accumulates for decades without release, the eventual result is what we witnessed in 1906. The 1906 San Francisco earthquake is not simply a historical event. It is an ongoing story, with its next chapter yet to be written. From that quiet night before April 18th to the morning that changed everything, San Francisco taught the world that the ground we stand on is not what we assume it to be. It is not a permanent foundation, but a living surface that is moving, accumulating, and waiting. What distinguishes us from the people of San Francisco in 1906 is not that we are safer, but that we know more. The question is not whether the ground will shake again, because the answer is clearly yes. The question is what we will do with that knowledge, and whether we will have sufficient time to prepare before the next test arrives. The 1906 San Francisco earthquake turned a city to ash in less than 1 minute, and it took more than a century for us to truly understand why and to learn how to respond. When you step outside today and look down at the ground beneath your feet, remember that it is not something static. It is moving, slowly and invisibly. And sometimes, after decades of waiting, it reminds us of that in a way that no one can ever forget.